Exactly. We're diving into the reasoning, the surprising results behind one of the toughest groups in the whole competition.
We are focusing specifically on round 2, Group 20.
And round 2 is where it gets serious. I mean, every album that makes it to this stage has already proven itself, right? It's already won a previous round.
Yeah.
They're all contenders. We're past the easy cuts. And the 4 albums in this group, wow, it's an incredibly diverse lineup. It forces this really fascinating, almost uncomfortable comparison.
Okay, so let's introduce them. First up, we've got the funk rock evolution of 2002. It's By the Way from the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Then a real late career surprise from a legend, Rod Stewart's Time, which came out in 2013.
A full decade later.
Yeah.
Then from 2011, you have the that kind of arena rock melancholia of Snow Patrol's Fallen Empires.
And finally, the big one, the modern classic, the culture-defining debut, whatever people say I am, That's What I'm Not by the Arctic Monkeys.
4 huge albums, 2 spots. We really need to understand the criteria that separated the winners from the ones that got knocked out.
Before we even get to the results for Group 20, I think we have to properly establish the rules here, the framework the author set up.
Right, because the rules are everything in this.
They are. So, as you said, it's a World Cup structure. Albums are put into random groups of 4.
And that randomness is absolutely key then. It stops the author from, setting up their favorite albums to win or creating easy groups.
Precisely. It forces these direct and, like you said, uncomfortable comparisons. You could have a 70s folk album up against a 2010s metal album. Anything can happen.
So once they're in a group, what's the process?
Well, this is the really disciplined part. The author listens to all 4 albums in the group back to back, and not just once.
Multiple times.
Several times. And this repetitive comparative listening, that's the crucible. That's what really tests an album's staying power.
So it's not about which one grabs you on the first listen.
Not at all. It's about which one holds up after the 5th or 6th listen, when you're hearing it right after 3 other great records. After all that, they're graded 1 to 4. The top 2 go through to round 3. Simple as that.
That repeated listening rule it feels like the genius stroke of this whole album quest. Why do you think that's so important? What kind of flaw does that expose?
Well, it's the ultimate test against filler, isn't it? I mean, an album might have 2 or 3 amazing singles, and the rest is just fine. On a first listen, you might think, wow, great album.
Because you're just remembering the hits.
Exactly. But when you are forced to listen to that mediocre stuff again and again, right next to 3 other albums that might be more consistent, that filler becomes a massive burden.
It starts to actively annoy you.
It does. Any little inconsistency, a weird track sequencing choice, a bit of dodgy production, it just gets magnified with every single spin. So what rises to the top is sustained quality, structural integrity, not just, fleeting coolness.
Which brings us back to round 2. The stakes are just so high. These 4 albums aren't coming in cold. They've all survived round 1.
They've all proven they can win. The author isn't trying to weed out the bad albums anymore. Now it's about separating the great from the good and the good from the just okay, all under this immense pressure.
So let's talk about that path. Understanding who they beat to get here really raises the stakes. Let's start with the Arctic Monkeys.
Okay, so their debut, Whatever People Say I Am, it got here by coming in 2nd place in its first round group, which was Group 112.
And what's wild about that group is who they were up against. They actually competed against another Arctic Monkeys album.
Yes, their own album, Favorite Worst Nightmare.
Which is a brilliant album in its own right, a lot of people's favorite. But in this quest, it finished last in the group.
It's just a fantastic quirk of the random draw, isn't it? It forces the author to make these really tough calls. And in this case, the argument was that the raw, youthful energy and the focused story of the debut just outshone the later, maybe more polished but less urgent album.
And it wasn't just their own album. They also beat Bear by Annie Lennox. But who won that group?
The winner was Out of Exile by Audioslave. So right from the start, the Monkees proved they could hang with some seriously heavy hitters.
Okay, what about Rod Stewart? His 2013 album, Time.
So Time also got a 2nd place spot. This was in round 1, Group 193. And for an album released so deep into his career, that's a huge statement.
It really is. And who did he lose to?
He lost to Greatest Hits Volume I by Queen.
Wow. Okay.
Which is, that's like trying to beat an all-star team. A Greatest Hits album, especially from a band like Queen, is just pure distilled quality. It's almost impossible to beat.
So the fact that Time came in second to that,
Yeah.
it shows it has some serious substance. It managed to knock out Be Yourself Tonight by Eurythmics, and an album by the Academy is.
It completely validates the idea that, a great artist can still produce incredibly competitive, high-quality music decades and decades into their career.
All right, Red Hot Chili Peppers.
By the way. They also took second place. This was in round 1, Group 73, and they finished behind Shamrock Diaries by Chris Rea.
That's an interesting one. Chris Rea's album is much more atmospheric, a bit softer.
It is, and it suggests that in this quest, that kind of sustained, maybe less flashy quality can be judged as having more integrity than something like the Chili Peppers. But still, they went through, eliminating the debut Savage Garden album and Word of Mouth by Mike and the Mechanics.
It just shows the insane diversity of the music collection this whole thing is built on.
Completely. And finally, you've got Snow Patrol's Fallen Empires. They advanced from Group 191, also in second place.
And who did they beat?
They beat 2 really strong UK rock contenders, Performance and Cocktails by Stereophonics and One Way Ticket to Hell and Back by The Darkness.
That's a strong field.
A very strong field. They only lost out on first place to Fire Within by Birdie, which is, again, another example of a less bombastic, more emotionally focused album setting the bar for quality in the first round.
So when you look at all 4 of these albums and their history in the quest, the expectation for Group 20 is just sky high. Each one has already knocked out major rivals.
It really sets the stage. Genre, age, how cool an album is perceived to be, all of that is irrelevant now. It just comes down to the sustained quality that's revealed when you listen to them over and over and over again.
Okay, stage is set. Let's get right into the results for Group 20. And there was no contest for the top spot. It was a clear, undisputed frontrunner.
Not even close, really.
Cruising into round 3 with a comfortable first-place finish was the Arctic Monkeys' debut, Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not.
And the way the author describes it, it just sounds like the perfect album for this kind of competition. It's called a debut smash that has rightly become a modern classic.
So what was its key advantage? What made it stand out so much from the others?
It's that relentless energy. The review says it successfully carried the listener along from the very first track to the very last. There are no dips, no lulls. It maintains this incredibly high standard all the way through, which, as we'll see, was a huge problem for the other albums.
And the reason for that seems to be its narrative cohesion. It's all tied directly to the personality of Alex Turner. This isn't just a random collection of songs.
No, it's a story,
Yep.
a hyper-specific, vivid, and, as the author says, literal description of northern nightlife. All that youthful chaos. It paints this picture that feels completely believable.
Unnervingly familiar with the phrase used.
Exactly. It has this tangible grounding. He's not just writing vague rock poetry. He's giving you social commentary through these sharply observed little stories from a night out.
Tales of bouncers, getting a taxi, run-ins with the police.
All of it. And that immediate realism gives the music this emotional hook, a real sense of place. The whole album feels like one single unfolding story.
It's like a short story collection set to music, but a very fast, very witty one. And the musical style just serves that story perfectly. The lyrical delivery is so rapid-fire.
It's almost rap-like, isn't it? The sheer density of the words, how conversational and tangled they are.
And the attitude matches the speed. The lyrics are so sardonic. The author used this brilliant phrase to describe it, imprudent drollness.
We have to unpack that phrase because it's the magic ingredient, imprudent drollness.
I mean, to me, that sounds like a kind of reckless, deadpan wit. It's that kind of humor you have late at night when you're maybe a little bit past caring what anyone thinks.
But you're still observing everything with this almost surgical precision.
Yes. It's the voice of a young, super intelligent person who is just a little bit bored and cynical about everything going on around them. And that energy is just electric. It's what makes you want to listen again and again.
Musically, that recklessness is channeled into this really potent mix of genres. You have the spirit of classic rock and roll, that, beat group urgency.
Mixed with this really aggressive, angsty, modern guitar sound.
It feels both old and new at the same time, which gives it this timeless quality that really helps in a competition like this.
But I think the real mastery, the thing that the review picked up on, is the detail in the guitar work.
Ah, yes, the lead guitar passages.
The author says they seemingly ramble around the center of the song, and yet somehow always return to the main thread beautifully.
That is the sound of controlled chaos. That's what it is. The band has taken all that narrative chaos from the lyrics, but they have the musical discipline to make sure the song never actually falls apart.
So it doesn't just sound like a messy jam session.
Not at all. The guitar takes these little winding detours, almost like it's mirroring the rambling late-night conversations in the lyrics, but it always, always lands perfectly back on the main riff. It just confirms how tight their control over the music actually is.
So it's that tension then, the chaos of the story versus the discipline of the music. That's what makes it so good on repeated listens.
It is. So the takeaway for the quest is pretty clear. This is an enjoyable, amusing album that feels like a night out with the boys. It's a single, perfectly executed experience that leaves no room for boredom, no room for criticism. It just sailed into first place.
Okay, so with the Arctic Monkeys setting that incredibly high bar for cohesion and narrative, the rest of the group pretty quickly became a straight shootout for second place.
It did. It boiled down to a battle between the Red Hot Chili Peppers, by the way, from 2002, and Rod Stewart's time from 2013.
And this is where the competition gets juicy. This is the perfect clash. It's undeniable, cool versus legacy substance.
On one hand, you have the Chili Peppers. I mean, they are the embodiment of that California funk rock swagger. They've always been seen as effortlessly cool.
Always. And on the other hand, you've got Rod Stewart.
Yeah.
And the author's very explicit about this contrast. The Chili Peppers have always been cool. Rod Stewart.
Not so much.
Not so much. And that's even before, the whole "do you think I'm sexy" phase, which the review calls cringy and yet admittedly pleasant and catchy.
That's a great description for it. But that initial perception is so important. But we can't forget, Rod has the history. The author even references his autobiography.
Which is apparently very entertaining.
Oh, it is. Trashing hotels, dating supermodels.
Yeah.
He lived that classic rock and roll life. He has the credentials. The question is whether the quality of this 2013 album can stand up against the perpetual coolness of a 2002 Chili Peppers record.
Right. So the real question for this album quest is, can genuine, heartfelt content from an older artist, even if it's a bit stylistically cheesy, can that beat the cool factor of a band like RHCP, especially if that cool album has some flaws?
That's the whole shootout in a nutshell. So let's look at the album that didn't make it. The album that, despite its cool factor, failed to get that second spot.
So landing in third place and getting eliminated from the album quest was the Red Hot Chili Peppers, by the way.
Their 8th studio album, and the review says that initially it felt like a grower.
Which you'd think would be a good thing, given the repeated listening rule. A grower should, in theory, do really well here.
It should have. But any benefit it got from being a grower was completely canceled out by two really critical penalties. First one, the length.
It's a long album.
It's almost 70 minutes long. And in this kind of competitive environment, that scale just becomes a burden. Now, the author is fair. He says there isn't really any filler in the traditional sense.
So every track is a proper song.
Right. But just the sheer amount of material, it leads to listener fatigue when you're hearing it in rotation with shorter, tighter albums.
So the length just magnified any inconsistencies. The review says the album is underwhelming in places, next to the killer parts. And if you have a huge track list, even if most of it is great, that weaker 20% or so gets amplified.
And the sequencing of the tracks becomes a problem. The author points to the specific effect of putting Throw Away Your Television and Calbron right next to each other. Together, they just seem to drag the pace of the whole album down. It creates this mid-album slump.
And in a knockout tournament, any noticeable lull, no matter how small, is a weakness the other albums can exploit.
Absolutely. But that wasn't the fatal blow. The length, the pacing, those were problems. The real deal breaker was technical.
The production quality.
The production. The author notes a seemingly patchy audio and a production strain that just undermines the whole experience.
This is a huge finding. It means that even a band of world-class musicians can be let down by what happens in the mixing booth. The review specifically says the track I Could Die For You gets messy, like they've overcooked it.
That word, overcooked, is so telling. It really suggests a mastering issue. It was probably a result of that trend in the early 2000s, the loudness war.
Where they just pushed everything into the red to make it sound louder on the radio.
Exactly. They compress the dynamic range so much that it causes audible distortion, especially when the music gets dense.
And the author even checked for this. He thought maybe he was listening to a dodgy MP3 copy.
But no! He confirmed the flaw was right there on the pristine CD version. So you can't blame the format. The problem is baked into the original recording. And for a competition based on close comparative listening, a flaw in the audio fidelity. That's a deal breaker.
When you're trying to find tiny differences between four great albums, a fundamental problem with how the music physically sounds, that becomes the decider.
It does. The author even says you can hear the strain right from the opening track, by the way, which leads to that kind of frustrated comment. It's just a minor thing, But that minor thing adds up over 70 minutes of strained audio, and it ultimately cost them their place.
We should acknowledge the good parts, though. It wasn't a complete disaster. The author did single out a 5-song run as the album's absolute peak.
Yes, tracks 3 through 7. That's This Is the Place, Dose, Don't Forget Me, the Zephyr song, and Can't Stop. That section is described as pure killer.
But in the end, a killer 5-song run just can't make up for 70 minutes of patchy audio and inconsistent pacing.
Not in this quest. Despite the undeniable coolness, despite those amazing high points, the structural and technical problems knocked either way out in third place.
Which brings us to the surprise winner of that second place spot, Rod Stewart's time.
The album that defied all expectations. The author calls out Rod's prehistoric origins, but this 2013 album is actually the newest one in the group, and it was a huge commercial success. It went to #1.
This is the real shocker of Group 20, I think. How does a late career album, one that comes with all this baggage of being cheesy, how does it beat the relentless cool and the huge peaks of the Chili Peppers?
The answer is authenticity and execution. The review says that after a few listens, the reason for its success becomes obvious. It is simply a joyful album.
So the narrative isn't about nightlife or angsty rock. It's about contentment.
It's about contentment in later life. Rod's personal happiness, his emotional state at the time, it shines through the music like a beacon. And that emotional clarity, that genuineness, that became its most powerful weapon in the competition.
But the author is very clear. It's not a perfect album. It has its cringy moments, and we have to talk about those to understand why they were forgiven.
Oh, absolutely. He pulls no punches. The first 2 tracks, She Makes Me Happy and Can't Stop Me Now, are called a bit cheesy.
And it gets worse later on. Sexual Religion and Make Love to Me Tonight are described as a little bit cringy.
So lyrically, stylistically, Rod is definitely embracing a certain sentimentalism, maybe an outdated romanticism.
But hang on. We just saw the Chili Peppers get knocked out for, pretty minor production issues, things you really have to listen closely for. How can openly cringy lyrics be less of a penalty than bad mixing? It seems backwards.
And that's the absolute killer question, isn't it? That's what defines the judging criteria in this round. The analysis in the source suggests that Rod's fundamental vocal gift is so powerful it acts as this emotional anchor that's strong enough to just override the cheese.
So his voice saves it.
The author says they could listen to Rod's voice all day. And when you combine that incredible voice with what he calls lustrous melodies, the core of the songwriting and the performance is just so strong that you forgive the occasional stylistic wobble.
Okay, so I think I get it. The technical flaw on the Chili Peppers album, the production, that fundamentally degrades the physical experience of listening. It just sounds bad.
Exactly.
Whereas Rod Stewart's cheese is a subjective, stylistic choice. And because the execution, the singing, the melodies is so polished, you can overlook it.
Precisely. The joy and the authenticity create this emotional connection that lets you forgive the cringe. And the best example of this is the album's highlight, Live the Life.
The song for his son.
It's described as an excellent life lesson letter to his son with a truly beautiful melody. That track is the perfect example of the album's theme of wisdom and contentment. It gives the whole record this essential emotional weight.
And crucially, the production quality, which was the downfall of RHCP, was a massive strength for Rod Stewart.
A huge asset. Time was, and I quote, beautifully produced by Rod himself, no less.
You can hear that attention to detail.
Oh, absolutely. The musicianship is top draw. It has this rich, complex mix of instruments. You've got guitars, drums, violins, saxophone, harmonicas.
And he even brings back the mandolin.
Even a bit of Maggie May-style mandolin creeps in.
Yeah.
And this expert use of all these different instruments, combined with that pristine production, just creates this technically flawless and emotionally rich listening experience.
So the final verdict is that, yeah, it might be old man music for an old man, but it's a collection of songs that endures because it's so authentically joyful and so technically impeccable.
Which is why Rod Stewart's Time grabbed second place and moved on to round 3. It proved decisively that in this competition, polished, heartfelt joy beats flawed cool.
Which brings us to the bottom of the pile. Finishing last, in fourth place, was Fallen Empires by Snow Patrol. And the review for this one,
Yeah.
it isn't defined by one specific flaw so much as this overwhelming sense of frustration.
It's the most damning critique you can get, really. The disappointment of unmet potential.
Right. The author knows that Gary Lightbody and his band are consummate musicians. They have the skill, they have the songwriting chops, they can write these huge, sweeping anthems.
But the album itself just stops and starts. It's called a frustrating inexperience, which points to a basic flaw in the artistic vision, or at least in the sequencing. There's no consistent flow.
I think the analogy the author uses is perfect for understanding why it failed so badly. He compares the disappointment to when your previous straight-A student's son might disappoint you when he suddenly comes home with a C-.
It's not an F. It's not a total failure.
No, it's an okay listen.
Mhm.
But because we know what they're capable of, because of albums like Final Straw or Eyes Open, this just feels like a massive step down.
The core issue is that inconsistency. The album teases you with these moments of brilliance, but it just fails to capitalize on them. You keep getting your hopes up, and then the very next track lets you down.
So you have to wait too long between the highlights.
Way too long. And we see a couple of those glimmers of hope. The first one is track 3, The Weight of Love.
Which is described as a building, mid-tempo rocker that makes you sit up and listen. It promises this dynamic, compelling album that, well, that never really arrives.
And then there's another little burst right at the end, a mini flurry of excellence. This includes those distant bells and what the author calls the album's best track, the symphony.
That one is a rousing, sweeping rock anthem. So it proves that when they want to, they can still deliver. The potential is still there.
It is, but those moments are just not enough, especially when the repeated listening rule comes into play. They're surrounded by this bulk of slower, blander tracks.
The review calls out The President and the Garden Rules as songs that just kill the momentum built up by the better stuff.
The result is an album that just feels wishy-washy in comparison to the other three. It couldn't handle the pressure. It didn't have the sharp focus of the Arctic Monkeys, or the polished joy of Rod Stewart, or even the intense high points of the Chili Peppers. That inconsistency just made it the weakest link.
And if all that wasn't enough to guarantee last place, the album commits what the author sees as a cardinal sin, a fundamental structural mistake that just cements its elimination.
Ah, yes. The stupid hidden or elongated nonsense at the very end.
The great sin of the CD era.
It really is. This is where the band, for some artistic reason, I guess, decided that what listeners really wanted after a long, inconsistent album was a gimmick.
Specifically, they decided the best way to end the experience was to force you to listen to 4 minutes of bird tweeting.
4 minutes!
I mean, 4 minutes of bird tweets. That's not just filler. That feels almost hostile to the person listening. It's like self-sabotage.
The author says listening to the album was already a little bit of a chore. To then add 4 minutes of unwanted, unnecessary nature sounds that he says should have been consigned to the new millennium bin, it's just a spectacular failure of judgment.
It just confirms a confused artistic vision for the whole project.
Absolutely. The author says the gimmick was not welcome. It's the final, decisive nail in the coffin that confirms this empire has well and truly fallen. It solidifies its 4th place elimination.
So if we pull all of this together, what have we actually learned from round 2, group 20? It really clarifies the criteria that matter most in this album quest.
It does. It's not just about having good songs. It's about the entire package. The consistency, the production, the execution.
Okay, let's quickly run down the final rankings and the reasons again. First place, Arctic Monkeys. Whatever people say I am.
And that was a victory for focused personality, total narrative cohesion, and just disciplined, high-energy execution.
Second place and advancing. Rod Stewart, Time.
Advance because of authentic joy, a powerful vocal performance, great melodies, and crucially, excellent production, all of which overcame that stylistic cheesiness.
Third place and eliminated. Red Hot Chili Peppers, by the way.
Eliminated by fatal production flaws, that overcooked sound, poor track sequencing, and a length penalty that just wore out the listener.
And in fourth, also eliminated. Snow Patrol, Fallen Empires.
Knocked out by pervasive inconsistency, a confused structure, and just frustrating unnecessary gimmicks, like the bird tweets.
So what's fascinating here is how the competition establishes this critical hierarchy. Technical skill alone isn't enough. Both Snow Patrol and the Chili Peppers are full of incredible musicians.
But that technical competence was proven to be less important than having a solid structure and an authentic emotional core.
The Arctic Monkeys won by being relentlessly focused. Their album was this tight, witty story that never lost its way. The whole was greater than the sum of its parts.
And Rod Stewart's success shows that real, genuine emotion, as long as it's executed with high-quality production and a great performance, can beat any kind of stylistic baggage. That contentment, shining through like a beacon, was a more powerful weapon than the Chili Peppers' cool, because that cool was built on a flawed foundation.
I think the biggest lesson here is about what gets you eliminated. The fatal flaws were all structural or technical. An inconsistent album that becomes a chore to listen to.
Like Snow Patrol.
Or an album with real production problems and a bloated runtime.
The Chili Peppers.
Those flaws were punished much more harshly than just being a little bit cheesy.
Exactly. This group proves that structural issues, inconsistency, bad pacing, gimmicks, are more fatal in a direct comparison than lyrical cheesiness, as long as the core performance and melodies are strong. Focus and execution will always beat unfulfilled potential.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The final thought for you to chew on until our next album quest.
We just saw Rod Stewart's Time Advance knocking out the perennially cool Red Hot Chili Peppers. And the deciding factor was the author hearing Rod's contentment in later life shining through like a beacon. It transformed the album into something genuinely joyful.
So you have to ask yourself, does that kind of authenticity, that unashamed personal joy, even when it comes through music you might call cheesy or old man music, does that ultimately create a more powerful, more enduring listening experience than music that is just cool or technically proficient, but fails to connect on that deeper level?
It's a great question. The Arctic Monkeys won with their perfectly executed observational cool. Rod Stewart won with unashamed celebratory joy. Both approaches worked, but the lesson is that genuine, polished emotion can absolutely overcome a perceived lack of style points when you put it in this kind of brutal, competitive framework.
It really forces you to reevaluate what quality in music actually means. Something to mull over as you spin your own records and apply these ideas of production, cohesion, and authentic impact. Thank you for engaging with this album quest into the source material.
We look forward to seeing what the next round reveals.